BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNid88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And welcome to BBOR, the home of true crime talk radio and your premier destination for unsolved mysteries, criminal psychology, and exploring the dark side of cyberspace. My name is Ned DeHaan, and I am your host, as well as the creator of AstroPsych 400 here on YouTube, and regular contributor to the Zodiac Killer channel. And a great way to support these shows is just by listening to some more content. But you can also go over to Amazon.com and have a look at the book Killer on a White Horse, written by me, Ned DeHaan. It is a novel, murder mystery, inspired by the Zodiac Manson connection, but it is indeed fictional. However, who doesn't love a good mystery? And there is always the TeeSpring page. Feel free to check out some of the merchandise. And remember, being weird is not a crime. Let the show begin.
Okay, hello everybody. Today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? Hope everyone had a good weekend. Just a couple of quick announcements and reminders before we truly begin. The first is that there are new short episodes that are coming out here on Black Box Online Radio. Feel free to visit the BBOR Shorts page, and they are also released on Facebook and Instagram. BlackBoxNet88, of course, on Instagram, and my personal Facebook is in the description box, and they will be coming out periodically. And for the Anything Goes Friday segment last week, I was planning on doing just a short episode on Jennifer Me and the story of the Hiccup murder, but it turned into a full-length Anything Goes Friday segment, so thank you to everyone who listened to that one, and feel free to visit some of the other Anything Goes Friday episodes in the past where any subject is fair game. And I also want to make the announcement that Black Box Online Radio will be going through a hiatus at the end of the month. It is now September, and in October, the episodes will have a very brief pause, and I'm hoping that the channel is going to go through some evolutionary changes where there will be all new types of content on Black Box Online Radio, and talking about doing more live streams, getting guests on the show, as well as covering other types of subjects. But after the hiatus, I'm hoping to get back to Zodiac Monday, Ripper Wednesday, the Anything Goes Friday segment, as well as 2 other days of discussions, and the YouTube Shorts will come out a little bit less frequently, maybe only on the weekends, but there's going to be a lot of changes. There are going to be a lot of changes that are happening to Black Box Online Radio, and if you would like to follow along with all of these discussions, I invite you to hit the like button and subscribe. You can also go over to some of the links in the description box. One of them is for BuyMeACoffee.com. BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackBoxNet88 allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. So, right now, I would like to address the title of this show because this is Zodiac Monday, of course, but the formal title is the Zodiac Killer News Report, and there is a lot of Zodiac news to discuss today. Firstly, there is a new book called The Zodiac Killer 2023 Guide, Decades of Research and Murder, that has been put out by Shannon V. Marin and Sandy Betts. And I had the opportunity to discuss this book with Sandy Betts for a little bit, but firstly, I would like to read the description of the book that has been made available on Barnes & Noble, and it seems like you can get it most places where books are sold, but this is from BarnesandNoble.com. In his 1986 book, the author Robert Graceman speculated that the Zodiac continued to kill long after a near arrest in San Francisco in 1969, but this was a divisive idea. An alternate view, apparently popular in law enforcement, was that the Zodiac's murders preceded or overlapped with those of an unrelated killer hunting girls and young women in the greater San Francisco Bay Area. The Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders were a core part of this theory. In both sets of killing, females with blonde or light brown hair were preferred targets. As information about both cases has grown and been refined, the number of common elements between the Zodiac killings and the Santa Rosa killings has grown. Though not the focus of this book, law enforcement apparently has entertained the idea that the perpetrator of the Santa Rosa murders killed in several other states. While such a scenario is still speculative, there are strong reasons to believe that the Zodiac continued to kill year after year for decades. The most elaborate Zodiac attack was at Lake Berryessa in 1969. Zodiac had made a costume and manipulated two young adults, claiming that he was carrying out a robbery to flee to Mexico. Once the victims were bound, Zodiac stabbed them. He probably left the male alive intentionally. While this is a confirmed Zodiac attack, its elaborate nature is often ignored. When considered with television and film themes and messages the killer sent, we have a theatrical, almost comic book murderer. This is important when evaluating the unsolved claims of Zodiac responsibility. This book focuses on the characteristics of the different crimes in which Zodiac is confirmed or suspected. Some unsolved homicides with Zodiac-like characteristics are included. Crimes for which Zodiac is no longer a suspect are provided as well, as the search for Zodiac victims has been centered on the general areas of San Francisco and Vallejo. The author's hope is that this book will contribute to identifying overlooked victims in other regions. And one more time, this was the book description for The Zodiac Killer 2023 Guide, Decades of Murder and Research by Shannon V. Marin and Sandy Betts. And I began corresponding with Sandy Betts about her book because I also just kind of wanted to expand upon that and ask a very direct question. In addition to that statement at the end, what is your prime ambition with the book? What is the prime ambition that you would like to set forward? The response I got was that the hope is that law enforcement will see it and will test the evidence and help solve the case. Sandy believes that DNA that she has and some evidence will prove that she was once stalked by the Zodiac and has his DNA or the DNA of Brian and Cecilia's on a dictionary that was put in her car on the same day or so of the Lake Berryessa stabbing, and that blood drops were found on this dictionary. To provide some additional information, Sandy Betts has a suspect whom she simply refers to as Tony, someone whom she's interacted with, and that's putting it lightly and mildly. She does not know his last name, but she does have her own Zodiac killer suspect. And I was discussing this with Sandy Betts once, and she said that it would take 8 hours to reveal her entire story in the new and updated format of BlackBoxOnlineRadio in the future that will start in October. Maybe we can do an 8-hour episode. I mean, I've done 3-hour and 50-minute episodes here on this channel before, so what's another 4 hours? But I also wanted to know how she knew her co-writer Shannon V. Marin, and she said from Tom Voigt's website ZodiacKiller.com, and they began connecting and sharing ideas about the case. And then you might notice from the cover of the book, though, that they focus in a lot on the name Davis. In 1962, there was the murder of Ray Davis, the taxi driver in Oceanside, California, which is very similar to the Zodiac Killer's 1969 murder of Paul Stine, the taxi driver in San Francisco. Now, there are numerous differences, numerous similarities, and I've discussed them in a lot of other episodes, but I noticed that there was this expanding set of arrows pointing to other people named Davis. And I was asking, is this book going to explore some type of connection where somebody is murdering people with the last name Davis as a type of signature? And Sandy said, well, it seems like more than a coincidence that a few victims had that name. And I even tried to clarify by saying, so the killer was targeting them because of the name, like a signature? And her statement is, could be, I'm not 100% sure, that was Shannon's find, not mine. And immediately, I had to ask about two other people who have the last name Davis who get tied to the Zodiac Killer mystery, and they are Bruce Davis and Howard Davis, because Howard Davis is the author of the Zodiac Manson connection, and by no relation he accuses Bruce Davis of being the Zodiac Killer. Bruce Davis was Charles Manson's right-hand man, and I said, are Bruce Davis and Howard Davis tied into that? And Sandy says, no, not that I know of. Howard Davis is a dear friend of mine, and his mother lived very close to my home. She was targeted after I went to her home. Howard doesn't believe that because his Zodiac suspect is in jail. And yes, Bruce Davis is serving a life sentence in jail for his role in some of the Manson family murders, not all of them, but some of them. And I just simply wanted to know, is there any additional piece of promotional material that you would like to share with the BBOR audience? Is there anything else you'd like to say about your book on Zodiac Monday? And Sandy Betts said, I found another note from my suspect that I had forgotten about, where he wrote a few questions for me to answer, then wrote my answers, then what my answers meant. The writing is very like the Zodiac. This book doesn't have everything that happened to me over all those years. Some things I have not shared with anyone, but there is more in this book that I have shared on other Zodiac sites. Other possible Zodiac victims have been found. Thank you for sharing my information, Ned. And thank you to Sandy Betts as well, because Sandy is someone who has also interviewed numerous people in the Zodiac Killer mystery. And through my correspondences with Sandy Betts, I found that she's talked to Harvey Hines, who's the guy that brought Lawrence Kane forward as a Zodiac suspect. She's talked to Roy Topai, who was present at the abduction of Dana Lowell in 1974, and it's possible that Roy Topai was witnessing Lawrence Kane abducting Dana Lowell, and then Dana Lowell would go on to be found murdered. Around 2 weeks later, her body was found in a mine shaft, and she has interacted with a lot of these people. She also attended the 50th anniversary of the Sahara Tahoe, where she met people who knew both Lawrence Kane and Donna Lass, and just she has a lot of first-hand connections to these stories and to the things that I'm just reading about on the internet that happened 50 years ago. So I greatly appreciate all the contributions from Sandy Betts, and I'm looking forward to her book. And as stated in the introduction, I have BuyMeACoffee.com, where people can make donations to help support the show. There's also the Super Thanks on YouTube, and normally I talk about that in the middle of the episode or the end of the episode. But right now I would like to give a supporter shout-out to River Prawn Pottery for making a donation to Black Box Online Radio. Thank you for your consistent support, River Prawn Pottery, another reliable supporter of Black Box Online Radio. And also there's one from Batman66. Batman66 greatly appreciated because Bruce Wayne Batman does not only contribute via the Super Thanks on YouTube or BuyMeACoffee.com. Batman66 has also been a reliable source of information, and he has shared something with me about a different Zodiac killer suspect named Richard Gaikowski. And this is going to be just going on the pile of maybe Geik was the Zodiac killer, or maybe there's just another enormous coincidence. Richard Gaikowski is one of the most widely discussed Zodiac suspects, and when I said I did that 3-hour and 50-minute episode about the Zodiac killer, that was the Richard Gaikowski edition. You can find it on Black Box Online Radio under the title of Zodiac Killer News Report, Richard Gaikowski edition, where I interviewed Jeremy Berthium, author of the book So I See You Don't Paint Houses. But Batman66 has written out a message here, and he says, I've been communicating with a vintage record shop owner in San Francisco. As you know, Geik was a distributor of punk films, Def Punk from around 1978 to 1984. He would create the flyers for various punk bands at the Def Club in San Francisco, bands such as the Dickheads, the Toiling Midgets, the Assassins, and the Mentors. The latter he designed a sketch of a black executioner hood. He seldom signed his flyers unless asked. Those are hard to come by and are a bit pricey. The flyer that I'm trying to talk to the owner about is a confirmed Geik flyer. It's confirmed as Geik's. Also, if you compare a few of his signed ones, the ink and style, size, etc., it does seem to match up. I sent him an email asking if I could trade in some vintage 45s for it, and if I get it, I would like to send it to you. I think once you see this particular flyer, there will be zero doubt that Geik was the Zodiac. I was left a bit stunned. Anyways, if you're interested, please let me know. And, of course, I said yes, and Batman66 sent me this flyer talking about the name Cypher. Geik created a flyer in the 1980s, or in that time frame, that's also for a band called Cypher, or just the name Cypher is used on the flyer, as you'll see. Again, this could simply be a coincidence that someone just had a similar band name, or it could also mean that Geik was the Zodiac killer, going in that pile. Now, as far as the band The Mentors, this is one where I'm going to go off on a side tangent, because I first learned about The Mentors because of their singer El Duce, who appeared on an episode of Jerry Springer once called the Shock Rocker episode. It was one of the best episodes of Jerry Springer ever. It's not about any of that weird stuff that Springer would be famous for. They were actually talking about the pros and cons of free speech in the music industry. And El Duce's talking about how he enjoys raping women and such, but he even goes on to become famous for something more than that. Maybe you've seen him in some of those Kurt Cobain documentaries where he's the guy who says that Courtney Love offered him $50,000 to murder Kurt Cobain, and like I almost can get the voice right. Courtney Love offered me 50 grand to whack Kurt Cobain, something like that. I mean, something to that effect. But it's one of the most famous things in the Kurt Cobain saga. But then he actually accidentally drops the name Alan, saying that that's the guy who actually killed him. And some people think that that's referring to someone or something named Alan Wrench. No, I shouldn't say that. Someone who actually has the name Alan Wrench. But the Mentors are a band that have had their own connections to the true crime world that is rather different. And they do have very similar executioner style hoods, except theirs form into points, where the Zodiac Killer's hood was mostly a rectangle. But what do you think about this Cypher flyer? What do you think about this flyer that has, according to Batman 66, been confirmed by the record shop owner as having been created by Richard Gaikowski? Do you think that that is something significant of Geik's guilt as the Zodiac, or do you think that this is just an unrelated coincidence with a similar word? Please leave your ideas in the comment section down below. And right now I would like to move to the next segment on Zodiac Monday, and revisit the channel Bad Things True Crime. Bad Things True Crime is a very good true crime channel. I really like how their videos are put together and how they're assembled. They have numerous videos about the Zodiac Killer. My only problem with them is, in almost every single video, they have to take maybe 5 or 6 minutes going through the basic facts of the case. And they take a long time to reintroduce the story before they can actually get to the theories or the subject or the heart of the video. So it becomes a little bit repetitive to people who are watching numerous Zodiac videos. But recently there was a documentary that was made called The Myth of the Zodiac Killer, which is based on the book by Thomas Henry Horan of the same name. And they have a video out that's been out for about a month now called The Zodiac Killer, a Hoax. And I was just watching YouTube, and because I follow things about the Zodiac Killer, this came up in my suggested feed. And believe it or not, I was more captivated by something in the comments section that was not talking about the Zodiac Killer hoax theory at all, and giving a shout out to Lester, who wrote this out in the comments section about Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, being the Zodiac Killer. Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, was the Zodiac. He fits the physical description. He was sexually troubled and even considered becoming a tranny before deciding in the psychiatrist's office waiting room not to reveal his intentions. He definitely had the mathematical knowledge and training to enact and use cryptographic codes and was nearing the end of his sanity rope. He had just moved to the area in 1966 or 1967, a couple years before the first Zodiac murders were attributed to the killer. His twisted sexual identity and confusion was beginning to simmer and boil. He hated women because early on he couldn't relate socially with them and was being awkward, later believing that he should have been born a woman. The reason he couldn't be found by the authorities is because he had started camping in the woods, where he eventually bought land and erected a sparse cabin. This is my theory. And there's so many pieces of information here to respond to. Firstly, the Unabomber Zodiac theory is widely discussed, and as far as 1966 or 67, one of the proponents of that theory is Mark Hewitt, who believes that Ted Kaczynski was the Zodiac and the Unabomber, and he does accuse Ted Kaczynski of the 1966 murder of Sherry Jo Bates. So Ted Kaczynski fits the physical description. Yes, he was 5 feet 9 inches tall. He was sexually troubled. Yes, Ted Kaczynski never had an intimate relationship in his life ever, even considered becoming a tranny before he decided in the psychiatrist's waiting room not to reveal his intentions. Now, I follow a lot of content on YouTube. I follow things that are outside of the true crime world, and sometimes when I'm watching things from the manosphere, or these debates that people have about male and female issues, one topic came up about how could a man consider becoming a woman because he thought that he would gain more acceptance, and all of the people on the panel on the show that I was watching were like, no, that's absolutely ridiculous. What are people talking about? No man would ever think that by getting a sex change that he's going to gain acceptance from society because he's now living the life of a trans woman. Well, what about Ted Kaczynski? I was like, goodness, I mean, this is very basic stuff, and it's my understanding of this story that that's exactly what Ted Kaczynski was thinking. This whole story about how the Unabomber at one point in his life had contemplated getting a sex change, thinking that he should have been born a woman. Well, it wasn't so much about some type of gender identity issue. It was that he simply thought that if he had been a female, he would have been more widely accepted by society, or that people would pursue him, or people wouldn't have viewed him as being awkward. So, I mean, I think Ted Kaczynski is a very clear example of that. Now, he did not go through the sex change operation, as it says very clear here, decided not to reveal his intentions, and also, I mean, Ted Kaczynski decided to deal with the problems of society by walking away from them. He got his bachelor's degree from Harvard, and then went on to get a master's and PhD in mathematics from the University of Michigan, and then went on to teach at the University of California at Berkeley. And then he just decided to walk away from that. He decided to go live in the cabin in Lincoln, Montana, and his way was withdrawing from society as opposed to actually going through with any type of operation. So he definitely had the mathematical knowledge and training to enact and use cryptographic codes, and was nearing the end of his sanity rope. Well, I definitely agree with the last part, that he was nearing the end of his sanity, because he went on to become a real serial killer. And as I talked about in a previous episode, Ted Kaczynski would be a very clear example of somebody who was also a terrorist, a serial killer and a terrorist at the same time. Now, this other part, though, he had the mathematical knowledge and training to enact and use cryptographic codes. Number one, the Zodiac definitely talked about things like radians and inches along the radians, and making diagrams and such. That could be significant of someone who has a very high understanding of mathematics, or it could be to the absolute contrary, that this is just somebody who learned about this stuff on his own. Maybe he remembered some of the things from high school. I even shared the story with you guys once about how I was talking to somebody about, hey, do you know what a radian is? Just a family member at a gathering. They're like, yeah. I'm like, well, what is it? Like, ah, crap, I don't remember, but I know we talked about it in high school trigonometry class. Okay, somebody could remember it like that. And one more credit to Jeremy Berthume, again, author of So I See You Don't Paint Houses, is he showed that Richard Gaikowski once wrote out a binomial, and wrote out like a complicated math problem for one of his articles in the good times. So Geik was certainly not a mathematician, but somebody who could have learned about things on his own. And Tom Voigt even points out that Richard Gaikowski was self-taught in computers in the 1980s. He was someone who was very intelligent, but was he actually the Zodiac killer, or just some type of troubled soul? It really becomes quite difficult. And there are also different theories that we can explore, because Sandy Betts and Jeremy Berthume, and perhaps even Tom Voigt to a certain extent, would look at the possibility of how there are other serial killers out there. And I think Jeremy has been the strongest voice on how, no matter what anyone says about Geik or other suspects like Lawrence Kane, they were serial killers. Lawrence Kane was a serial killer. He just went about it in somewhat of a different way. He accuses him of multiple murders, the murder of Dana Lowell, the murder of Donna Lass, and some people think that Gaikowski might have committed other crimes so that it aren't even closely examined in the Zodiac world, and I've discussed a lot of them on this channel. You can always hear more about it in the episode Possible Zodiac Killer Crimes, where Jeremy is a guest on the program. But I want to address something different, and that is this use of cryptographic codes. Do the Zodiac Killer ciphers really need a high understanding of mathematics? Like all these people who are saying, well, he had military training, therefore he's the type of person who could have created a cryptographic code. The Zodiac Killer's first code was the 408 cipher, which was mailed in July of 1969. Mailed in 3 parts to 3 different newspapers. And it was a simple substitution cipher. It was solved extremely easily over a period of, well, a short amount of time. And when the reason why I'm hesitating is I said extremely easily. I mean, Don and Betty Hardin solved the 408 cipher, and they did work at it. They didn't figure it out in 2 seconds. They put some hard work and effort into it, and it turned into the solution. I like killing people because it's so much fun. It's even more fun than hunting wild game in the forest, because man is the most dangerous animal of all. And some people are just like, well, okay, once they figured it out, it really shows that that's not a very complicated cipher. That's not a very complicated solution. Then the Zodiac Killer would go on to write the 340, which went unsolved for more than 50 years. And was solved by David Warrenchack, Earl Van Eyck, and Sam Blake, but with the assistance of technology. However, even based on the implications in that one. Is that truly necessary that someone had an advanced understanding of any academic discipline? Maybe somebody could have created the ciphers on their own without advanced education. I mean, even without any type of code book or something, just basic familiarity with watching things on the TV or reading about things in comic books and storybooks as kids. People know about codes and cryptograms, and like someone could have used their own basic knowledge. Maybe I'm completely off on that, but I don't think you needed a math degree or military training to create the Zodiac Killer ciphers. Ted Kaczynski hated women because early on he couldn't relate socially with them, being awkward, later believing that he should have been born a woman. There are a lot of issues with Ted Kaczynski and women, and as I said, it's reported that he never had an intimate partner. And when I was reading Douglas Oswald's book, The Unabomber and the Zodiac, he talked about Ted Kaczynski formed some basic relationships with women. He had got to the kissing stage in life, more or less, being very, very mild on the details here. And on one time, he even went on a date with a woman, and they went apple picking, and then they baked an apple pie together. And then she decided that she wanted to break up with him and not see him anymore because they were co-workers, and she found that the only thing they had in common was the job. The only thing they had to talk about was the job. And I was like, wow, you said that after eating apple pie? What a cold-hearted way to break up with someone. Yeesh. But somebody like Ted Kaczynski, perhaps, couldn't necessarily respond to that because he was indeed an awkward person, and this was reported by Dr. Henry Murray at Harvard University, who stated that Ted Kaczynski was the most alienated student that he had come across at the time. But was he the Zodiac Killer? Somebody has brought up a challenge question here, and I'm only going to use the first name. Rachel challenges this idea of Ted Kaczynski being the Zodiac Killer. One more time, this is from Bad Things True Crime, available on YouTube, and it says, Ted Kaczynski was too much of a coward to kill anyone up close. And this is something that countless people point out. The Unabomber killed from a distance. Now, the Zodiac wasn't the bravest person in the world, but he tied up the victims at Lake Berryessa and stabbed them. He murdered Paul Stein in the taxi cab and handled his body. The Zodiac got very close to the victims at Lake Herman Road in Blue Rock Springs. The Zodiac and the Unabomber seem quite different. And the person who wrote the original comment, named Lester, says, I believe that he started mailing it in after he was seen with the taxi cab driver. He wouldn't get that close to his foul work more often for concern of being caught. And this becomes the foundation of the Zodiac Unabomber connection, where you would almost have the Zodiac as the predecessor of the Unabomber, or the Zodiac would be the Unabomber's training grounds. Someone who's committing murders, and they're done in an inconsistent and sloppy way, as I said, serial killer training, where this person is looking at different ways to kill people, writing in different taunting messages, and after the murder of Paul Stein on October 11th of 1969, the Zodiac Killer almost got caught. He almost got apprehended by detectives, and then he went on to write in one of his letters that 2 cops pulled a goof from a cab, and that shows that there was a very close encounter between Officer Donald Falk and Officer Eric Zelms, that they almost had the opportunity to catch the Zodiac, but they were looking for a black man instead of a white man. And there is a video that has been made about this, doing some types of depictions or sharing some of the older videos put together in somewhat of a collage on the channel Real Zodiac Killer Revealed 2023, which is run by Adam, and he has his own Zodiac Killer suspect, John Parr Cox, and you can see some videos of John Parr Cox available on that channel as well. This person, Rachel, has responded by saying, Robert Graysmith has a whole chapter in Zodiac Unmasked on how the Zodiac and Unabomber were different, and then this has to also get the condition that Robert Graysmith also has his own book on the Unabomber called Unabomber, A Desire to Kill. The biggest differences are that the Unabomber is just someone who has much stronger antisocial tendencies. The Unabomber is someone who has a manifesto that has been attributed to him. And we're talking about terrorism, and we're talking about that guy, someone who wrote a very good response in a previous episode, saying that a terrorist is truly someone who has a political or social agenda. Absolutely. The Unabomber had a political and social agenda, industrial society and its future. I mean, the Zodiac does not appear to have an exact political or social motive for committing the crimes. Instead, the Zodiac is very clearly saying that he's committing the crimes for his own selfishness, because he wants to kill people, and he wants to die and be reborn in paradise. Those who he has killed will be his slaves. And he's also saying very clearly that he wants his notes published in the paper, because he wants attention. It's all about his own self-serving needs. Now, if you were to ask somebody like Mark Hewitt about that, what he would say is that the Zodiac, or Ted Kaczynski, I mean, his Zodiac suspect, was a serial killer, and he decided from a very early age that he was going to be a killer, and his primary focus was just to kill. I mean, this is something that Mark Hewitt has talked about over and over again. Ted Kaczynski didn't care about the environment. He didn't care about industrial society. He went against so many things in the Unabomber Manifesto. He destroyed the land. He was a poacher. He abused animals. He stabbed a dog in the buttocks once. When his neighbors were out of town, he just started chopping at their house with an axe. He was a deranged, mentally ill man who didn't get the sex and appreciation that he wanted from women, as well as the appreciation from society, so he wanted to just act in a chaotic way and try and destroy humanity in some manner of speaking. And yes, I'm paraphrasing that, but I've interviewed Mark Hewitt 3 times, including for the Zodiac Killer Channel's Interview with the Experts series, and feel free to go through some of those interviews. And there are also going to be countless new interviews that are going to be coming out on multiple channels, also on Planet X Filmworks, which is hosted by Ross. He is going to be releasing more Zodiac interviews as well. He does a great job over there. I invite you to like and subscribe to his channel. And someone, They Can't All Be Zodiac, I believe that's Neil using his They Can't All Be Zodiac name, says, doesn't fit the description at all. Yes, the Unabomber is very different than the Zodiac killer, but there are some physical similarities, similar handwriting. As I said, maybe the body type would be just a little bit off. 5'9" would be acceptable for the Zodiac, and one person wrote into the channel by saying that Ted Kaczynski talked about this very clearly, about how he would disguise his appearance to make himself look fatter, is that he would just wear 2 overcoats, where he would wear multiple layers of clothing, and that's why that the Zodiac might appear heavier at Lake Berryessa, also would appear taller by wearing the Executioner's hood. So, but that just kind of means that Ted Kaczynski doesn't match the physical descriptions, so you have to rely on some type of other way of making the pieces fit. Now, the one thing that I did share was a New York Times article that I read once before that has confirmed something about the Unabomber that people think about the Zodiac killer, and they found boots in Ted Kaczynski's possession where the sole of a different boot was put onto to the base of a different shoe, so that they would be leaving incorrect footprints. Some people hypothesize about that with the Zodiac killer, that that's what the Zodiac was doing at Lake Berryessa, and those would be the types that just think that the Zodiac is an extremely methodical and calculating serial killer, and other people just think that the Zodiac was a reckless serial killer who got very lucky. And when I say extremely methodical and calculating, the Zodiac committed multiple murders in 1968 and 69. The Lake Herman Road murders, the Blue Rock Springs shooting, the Lake Berryessa stabbing, and the Stein murder. And they think that after each one of these crimes, the Zodiac destroyed the firearm, burned his clothes, maybe purchased clothes from a thrift store that weren't his, and then destroyed them as well, so that nothing would be traced back to him. And other people are like, no, the Zodiac is just some guy who got lucky because someone put out an APB on October 11th of 1969 saying, look for an NMA, Negro male adult, instead of a Caucasian male adult, and that's how he was able to get away with it. There was just one more thread on the Bad Things True Crime video that I would like to respond to, and that comes to us from someone, Billy, again just saying the first name, and says something about the Zodiac hoax theory. The idea that these were unconnected murders and that someone just wrote letters taking credit for the murders, and says, it could be half true. The first 2 were Zodiac, and everything after that was BS cockadoo-doo. Yes, I don't get to use the word cockadoo-doo too much, that's why I wanted to read this one. But this is something that I have thought about as well. You don't have to even go down the Zodiac hoax theory pathway. Immediately, just looking at the Lake Herman Road murders and the Blue Rock Springs shooting are somewhat similar. You have 2 couples that are parked in cars in Lover's Lane-like areas, even though perhaps Lake Herman Road isn't a conventional Lover's Lane, but both the victims are shot with guns, and the bodies are not moved by the killer. Someone fired some gunshots and then got away. A particular difference is that at Lake Herman Road, the victims are outside of the car, whereas in Blue Rock Springs, the victims were shot inside of the car. So there's nothing consistent in the world of Zodiac activity, except for maybe the fact that automobiles are present in all the crimes. But I've thought about this too, because then you have the drastic changes in the Zodiac persona, such as the Blake Berryessa stabbing, which is the first crime after the Zodiac revealed his name to the world. Remember, in July of 1969, first we have the letters in the three-part cipher, and then in August of 1969, the Zodiac gives himself the name, "This is the Zodiac speaking." September of 1969, the Zodiac goes on to commit the Lake Berryessa stabbing, committing a crime by knife, wearing a hooded costume, tying the victims up, and all types of differences. Then you have the Stein murder on October 11th of 1969, which is even less intricate but still riskier, where someone is murdered in a more populated area in Presidio Heights, and Paul Stein was a lone male, the only time the Zodiac killer killed a lone male, and it's almost as if, well, now with the first two crimes, either the same killer, or then everything else is just unconnected and they're copycats. I've discussed all of these theories over the years. But someone named Thomas is responding to Billy saying, "Surely you believe the Stein case is Zodiac?" And lots of people do, because after the Stein murder, a piece of Paul Stein's shirt was mailed in with multiple Zodiac letters, not just one, but multiple Zodiac letters, including the Melvin Belli letter, which was sent in December of 1969. Billy responds by saying, "Honestly, all joking aside, I'm just done with it. I went down the rabbit hole in this case 6 different ways in over 10 years. I think I've seen every documentary ever, and it's never going to be solved." Well, I don't approach it that way. I mean, think about all the true crime cases that we have seen solved in the last 5 years. And I mean it, in 5 years, even going back to the Golden State Killer mystery. But a big difference is, with the Golden State Killer case, they had a lot more physical evidence. Joseph D'Angelo, the Golden State Killer, would not only get physical with the victims, but he also would steal things from the refrigerator. He liked to eat crackers and drink beer on people's back porches, and he left all types of DNA evidence behind, and he didn't have to worry about it because he didn't know that DNA was going to be a thing back in 1974, 1986, when he was committing all of those crimes. With the Zodiac Killer, as previously stated, the Zodiac didn't have an enormous amount of physical contact with the victims. But one thing that I have always said, and if you've listened this far into the episode, this is one thing that I have always said about the Zodiac Killer, and that is that maybe, somebody will find the Zodiac Killer hood with Brian Hartnell's blood on it, or Cecilia Shepard's blood on it, and that would be a very strong piece of evidence. Think about what Sandy Betts was saying about the dictionary that she has that might have drops of blood on it from somebody that could be linked to the Zodiac Killer case. If some way, somehow, you were able to make those types of connections, then we could have the case solved. Or even if somebody is going through a trunk in the attic and they find Paul Stein's wallet or something like that, and they're examining the driver's license and it has blood on it. So if somebody finds something like that, it's possible that we could actually have the case solved. So I completely understand what this person is saying, that it's never going to be solved. I've been down the rabbit hole so much. So have all of you guys. So have I. So have all of us. But I still think there's a high chance that the Zodiac Killer mystery could be solved at some point in the future. And the final one is, someone named Colleen decided to hijack the thread by saying, "The most compelling suspect was the filmmaker whose name was in the cipher. Gabowski or something. Gabowski or something." Yes, of course, referring to Richard Gaikowski, but of course calling him Gabowski or something. Maybe that person was watching the movie The Big Lebowski or something like that, and they were just like maybe having a couple joints or something when they wrote that comment. Yeah, I know who the Zodiac Killer is. It's Dick Gabowski. Yeah, right. Final concluding note that I have for Zodiac Monday relates to something that was sent to me by Michael Fisher, and this was available from the email address BlackBoxOnlineRadio@AOL.com. This is where Michael sent it, and he decided to share some things with me about the Zodiac Killer, almost in creating his own observations and profile. and it's a lengthy document, about 11 pages long, so I would just like to read a section of this for you and look at some claims that Michael Fisher has made about the Zodiac, because as previously stated, the Zodiac wasn't only a serial killer, he was also somebody who created cryptograms and ciphers, and here is something about the letters and the ciphers and the cryptograms. And begins the quotation from Michael Fisher. What I read is a guy who is desperate to hide insecurity in the fact that he can't write. Yes, he can speak, he can read, but he never learned to put pen to paper beyond an elementary grade level. I find zero hint of higher English composition learning, maybe due to a learning disability like untreated dyslexia, which can cause the severe slanting. And it's so severe that you can break each letter into 3 distinct parts. Also, the misspellings, which become more obvious later on, can come from sounding out words, a type of visual blindness that results from dyslexia. Guaranteed. The faster and longer he writes, the more words he'll get wrong, or drop or transpose. I'm sure he is aware of this, but to others it can be misinterpreted as sinister. His letters asked only to have the cipher printed, not the letter itself. It's possible he saw the confusion it attracted and rolled with it, an unexpected gift that worked in his favor. It's hard for a fully literate adult to convincingly fake the writing of a first grader, both in spelling and grammar and overall narrative form. Not even the children's book authors successfully achieve this. Zodiac's simple sentences of nouns and verbs are mainly comprised of monosyllable words, with no usual pauses to suggest that he's thinking about what to say. No, I doubt he's faking. It's too damn real. On the front page of the Chronicle letter, he used only one adjective. That says a lot. Further, one notices almost no signs of cursive in his lettering. Usually people who can print and write cursive mix the two styles unconsciously, in some way I've observed. It's interesting that he doesn't. Well, thank you so much to Michael Fisher for that comment. And I personally mix printing and cursive when I'm doing my signature. Like if you look at my driver's license, you'll see that it's a blend of printing and cursive. I also, I do this when I'm writing very quickly. I can blend printing and cursive. But some people think that, again, the Zodiac was meticulous, and that he is trying to shape the letters very clearly because he wanted people to read them, and he's actually writing very slowly. Now, one person that's going to disagree with Michael Fisher in his assessment of this is going to be Stefan Nyberg, who was the author of the essay concerning the Exorcist letter, and I've discussed that on a previous Zodiac Killer News report, and he stated that he believes that the misspellings in the Zodiac letters are intentional, and a prime example of this is he's looking at the 1974 Exorcist letter and shows how the Zodiac misspelled the words satirical and comedy, but he uses the I from satirical in the word comedy, and the E from the word comedy in the word satirical like they are flipped. So that's a piece of evidence that he would propose is an intentional misspelling, and that the Zodiac is educated, he's just misspelling things on purpose. Now, there is something in Michael Fisher's comment that I think deserves stronger consideration, and that is that, did the Zodiac start by misspelling words on accident, and then people began to take notice of it, or even he took notice of it and just decided to roll with it as an added gift, just an added layer of confusion, maybe throw in some other misspellings to throw people off? Or Michael Fisher could be completely correct that this person doesn't have spell check. This person doesn't know how to spell, so he's sounding out the words. Yes, he can read. Yes, he can speak. Or, I mean, he can read at somewhat of a reasonable level. But can he spell words without any type of computer that's correcting him? I am not very good at that, by the way. I mean, if it weren't for spell check, I wouldn't really be able to spell a lot of words because, you forget. And in our day and age, we don't have to. But what do you think about this? Do you think that the Zodiac Killer was not very well educated and he had a low level of English composition learning, and he's trying to sound out the words, so he's just writing them somewhat phonetically? Like, for example, I'm mildly serious to know how much you have on my head. Instead of curious, he wrote serious, C-E-R-O-U-S, serious, like curious. I mean, that very clearly is meant to be the word curious, but he misspelled it serious, and do you think that that's what's happening, or do you agree with somebody like Stefan who would say that these are all intentional and they are done for specific reasons? And of course, me, Ned DeHaan, I have to go back to this over and over again. Jack the Ripper also sent in letters with numerous misspellings. And this is just another example of the Zodiac killer emulating from Jack the Ripper. And not only did the Ripper misspell words, very simple words, like even, as we've discussed on the channel before, if you go to my episode on the open shawl letter or on one of the Zodiac Killer news reports, I even talked about this, about how one word can be spelled correctly on the envelope of the letter, and on the text of the letter it's spelled incorrectly. So, I mean, Jack the Ripper and the Zodiac have countless parallels. But what do you think about any of this? And please give your ideas on the comment section down below. And I would like to conclude the episode with a more formal supporter shout-out segment. As previously stated, I have to give a big thank you to Batman66 for his regular and consistent support, and to River Prawn Pottery as well. But I would also like to give a shout-out to Glenn Spencer via BuyMeACoffee.com, and Glenn Spencer says, "Don't hesitate to look into the Jack the Stripper crimes," and perhaps that could be something that will be discussed on the Anything Goes Friday segment, or perhaps when Ripper Wednesday returns, that could also be a place where I would discuss those, because some other people have been very curious about a segment on the Jack the Stripper crimes, which actually took place in the 20th century as opposed to Jack the Ripper in the 19th century. And thank you so much to anyone who has left donations via BuyMeACoffee.com, and not to mention the membership as well, but also via just the regular donation page, and of course there's the super thanks on YouTube. Anybody can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box, and there is always BlackBoxNid88 over on Instagram, and I will see you over there. Goodbye.